Hello, citizens of YouTube land,
Hey,
and welcome to the third installment of March of the Irish, which, of course, actually the first one was March of the Leprechauns, but yes, it's the third annual March of the Irish, and we begin things this year with, appropriately enough, The
the
Irishman,
Irishman.
which was directed by Martin Scorsese. It is a 2019 film. It has a budget of 159 to 250 million dollars, making it the most expensive and the longest Martin Scorsese film.
Really? Oh
Yeah,
yeah. The
it
previous
has
one,
both of them.
I think the previous one was actually The Wolf of Wall Street
Maybe. So it
being the
stars the
longest.
usual suspects when it comes to a Martin Scorsese film, guys. We get Al Pacino. We've got Robert De Niro. And coming out of retirement,
Just for this movie.
Joe Pesci. So, The Irishman tells the story of Frank Sheeran,
Yeah.
who was a local Teamster member in eastern Pennsylvania, the Scranton area. And he very quickly becomes good buddies with Russell Buffalino, played by Joe Pesci.
Well, it's after his cousin, or not his. I think it was either his cousin or his brother, Will or Bill Buffalino, bailed him out of some legal trouble, and then he's like, "Oh, here, let me introduce you to my cousin or brother, Russell."
And of course,
And Frank quickly becomes one of the top associates for the Buffalino crime family.
now, guys, as usual, when we cover stuff like this, listen, the glamour, the glitz, the attraction of the crime families, of criminal organizations, it can be very alluring. It really can. And in this case, Frank was kind of a down on his luck type of guy, wasn't really doing much. And one thing leads to another, and suddenly he's an associate enforcer for the Buffalino crime family.
Yep.
And guys, Frank is a psychopath.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, quite honestly, that's what he is. There's a scene, guys, where his daughter tells him that the local shopkeep had pushed her. Now, it's 1960 something, right? So it's kind of actually encouraged at this time for adults to discipline children, even if said children aren't yours. It
Yeah.
was that kind of time period. So he flips out, though, and he marches right down to the local corner grocery. And
With his daughter.
the guy says, "Hey, Frank, your daughter was out ahead. She was mouthing off. She was being rude." You know, which she probably was, to be honest. And what
And
does
then
he do?
he pushes him, beats him to a bloody pulp, right? And then takes his hand, and then he says, "You're never going to push my daughter again," and curb stomps his hand multiple times.
And it kind of changes his daughter, though. She is like pretty much afraid of him from that point on. That she sees him as the monster that he really is. So, having said this, guys, and having given you a little glimpse as to the type of character that Frank Sheeran is, one thing leads to another. And suddenly he's involved with Jimmy Hoffa, too. Now, Jimmy had a love hate relationship with the mob, and that they basically financed a lot of his activities. But at the same time, he didn't want any of that illegal stuff going on with his unions.
Yeah. So apparently the mafia also got old John F. Kennedy elected as well.
Pretty much, yeah. This is pretty much common knowledge. And the irony behind that, though, was that who should become the Attorney General of our esteemed country at that time but his brother Robert,
Yep.
who went hard at the mob. Y'all all know, those that are old enough. I'm actually not old enough to remember, but I've seen the tapes of him grilling Jimmy Hoffa, of him grilling Russell, of him grilling all of these different ones. And they're always taught the same thing, the mob guys. It's always the same when it comes to questioning them in front of in a courtroom. It's always, I plead the fifth.
Yep. And so Joey, so there's a big time mobster who's rising through the ranks, right? Guy named Joey. So apparently, his Russell had uh, a pin. Sorry, Russell had a pin on for like Italian civil
Yeah.
servants, which is basically celebrating Italian heritage. And then Joey's like, "You don't believe in that BS league, do you?" And he's like, and then Frank's like, Joey, come on, come here." And then
1
basically,
second later, Russell gives him a
the
look. And the next scene, Joey is sleeping with the fishes.
Yep.
Because that's the kind of thing that happens, guys. It doesn't even matter. It can be a harsh word, it can be a look that you give them, it could be anything. There's any reason whatsoever that they can make that happen.
Yeah. And it was just because of the fact that he was disrespecting Italian heritage.
And Russell, Joe plays Russell as this quiet, reserved, kind of really, 2 steps ahead of the process type of gangster. But in reality, Russell was a bona fide psychopath as well, who willingly and maliciously went after a witness so that he wouldn't go to prison.
Yep. And then got caught on that.
And this was a man who was a senior citizen at the time when he did it.
Yep.
So, guys, one thing leads to another. Hoffa, he is making enemies. By the way, special shout out to Al Pacino's performance, because he is channeling a little bit of like the Scarface from Scarface. He is dropping the F bombs left and right, guys.
Yeah.
And so he's like, Hoffa, he's always on our, that Kennedy, they're always on my case, and this and that. And so,
and he says some like really anti-Catholic things, like you can never trust a Catholic, you can never trust an Irish, like all that.
And you can never trust. He goes, and there are specific derogatory terms towards Italian Americans that Jimmy, hypocritically, mind you, uses. Now, we're not going to go into what those terms were because we're not a channel that promotes racism or any of that nonsense. So,
oh no, of course
we're going to leave that alone. So, guys, one thing leads to another. And Hoffa is in it thick with the mob. Basically, he knows his days are numbered.
Yeah, and the Russell kind of goes to Frank and he says, "Hey, listen, we're not liking the amount of shouting that Hoffa is making. Make him be quiet."
Because Hoffa had went to prison and he wanted it, and he got out and he was going to retake his union, and the mob had basically installed their own president who was willing to just, oh, you guys want to run drugs? Okay, I don't care. You guys want to run guns? Okay, I don't care. That type of guy. So, but Hoffman wasn't that type of guy. He wouldn't abide by that. And he kept making noise and kept making noise. And then there's a meeting, and they're going to go to it.
Okay, so can we talk?
Go ahead.
So there's this one guy who kind of like goes off on Hoffa's son about fish.
Yeah.
Like,
so, guys, I don't know what this is, okay? It seems to be a stereotype, but he tells me that it's absolutely a thing that Italian Americans do. I'm not going to say that it is, but those of you with Italian descent or heritage, let us know in the comments. Is this really a thing? but they blow up the fact that this kid had bought a fish and left it in his car. And then the mafia's guy, well, what kind of fish was it? Was it a carp? Was it a trout? Was it a bass?
How could you buy a fish without knowing what kind of fish it was? He's like, I don't know, it's just a fish. He's like, oh, it's just a fish? Like,
So he goes, that's for like 5 minutes straight. And when we get to the next movie, there's a similar scene where it happens again.
yeah, with Joe Pesci's character.
So they I don't know what it is, but yeah. And so yeah, uh that guy was going on and on about the fish. Hoppa's son and that guy and
Frank.
Frank were going to pick up Hoppa at his house. And Hoppa's pretty reserved and hesitant. It's almost like he knows because of course he'd know, right? But he gets into the car. And this is his mistake because when they get to the house where there's going to be the meeting, whoa, guess what? Nobody there. Put two and two together. Hoppa is sleeping with the fishes.
Yep.
They never find the body, though. Now, we have to point this out, too, that this is only one theory, one speculation. Nobody knows for sure exactly what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. Some say that it was indeed this Irish hitman, Frank Sheeran. Some say that it was the Iceman who was operating at that time, too. Some say that it was somebody else entirely. Because there's a saying out there, guys. You're not a very famous hitman. I mean, you can be a famous hitman only if people know what you are doing. People, real hitman wouldn't draw attentions to themselves,
Yep.
and you'd never actually know. So, with that being said, guys, one thing leads to another too, and they all end up in prison for one thing or another. In the case
But it
of
was never about Jimmy Hoffa.
nope, nobody served a day for Jimmy Hoffa. There were some that went in for extortion. There were some that went in for intimidation of witnesses.
Russell Buffalino.
There were
What?
there were some that went on trumped up drug charges. But the bottom line is, guys, with all their flash, all their pizzazz, all their circumstances, you know what you're left with in the end? A bunch of old, washed up has beens reliving their glory days, which
Yep.
is the scene that we get when they're in the prison.
Yep. And Frank, he actually gets out of prison.
And he starts to feel guilty about the things that he did in his life. And he never does actually reveal what happened to Hoffa. In real life, Frank confessed to it. In the movie, he does not. Um, so he tries to make amends with his daughter, who is basically like, look,
Penny.
you were a monster. We were afraid of you. And maybe that enough there was what really, really killed Frank.
Yeah. So I want to talk about something real quick. Russell kind of gives off this kind of like pedo vibe in a way. Just if you watch the movie, guys, just watch and you'll kind of pick up on it. Same with Jimmy as well. Like,
I want to interject for a minute though, because it's not really a thing as far as that goes. What it's really is, hey kids, oh, you're all here. Here's some candy. Why don't you go play in the room while me and dad talk about business?
business.
That's what it really is.
Yeah. No, it's just if you watch the movie,
Yeah.
guys, and you'll pick up on the same stuff I was picking.
She was
up.
kind of pretty hesitant about it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, with all that having been said, guys, we kind of breezed through a lot of it. It's very dialogue heavy, too.
Here's the thing: the movie's 3.5 hours long.
Yeah. And if we went through every detail, our review would be like an hour and a half long. So, anyways, guys, so that's my final rating for this is 4.25 out of 5. What say you?
Also a 4.25 out of 5.
It's really good, guys, but the running time, it does at time, for me personally, and it's our opinions naturally, but for me personally, I was never bored, but at times it did kind of drag through the middle.
Yeah. And it's like it kind of suffered the same fate as Titanic, where kept pausing it. And we're just like, ah,
Yeah,
because it's a. Don't get me wrong, it's a good movie, but it's
it
just a
was
chore
it
to
was a
get
really
through.
good movie, but at times, like I said, it kind of drawed and dragged in the middle. Maybe if they'd tightened a few things up, maybe cut out 10 to 15 minutes, and it would be even a bigger score. But of course, as always, if you have seen The Irishman and you believe that it is the worst gangster movie of all time, then clearly you have never seen. Hmm, drawing a blank here. They're
Mm.
usually pretty good.
I don't know. There's a couple from like The Godfather Part 3.
Yeah, we'll go there. We'll just use that one, The Godfather Part 3. But of course, as always, uh, just remember, we're just two idiots with a webcam. Our opinions do not matter, except they actually do, because we have a YouTube show, except they actually don't. So, having said all that, guys, we'll see you next time where it's going to be Goodfellas.
I like the voice crack there, Dad.
Yeah, okay.
Goodfellas.
Goodfellas. But anyways, guys, that's all the time we have for this episode. So there's only one thing left to say, and that is
Peace and love from Denny and Son.
Bye.